The package arrived on a Tuesday morning, sleek and modern against the weathered wood of our front porch. I'd saved for 8 months, working extra shifts at the feed store, just to afford this piece of technology that promised to revolutionize our farming operation. My hands trembled slightly as I carried the drone box past my father, who was sharpening his scythe by the barn. He glanced up, his weathered face creasing into familiar lines of disapproval. The look said everything his words didn't need to. Another one of my foolish ideas. Another waste of money we couldn't afford. My grandfather emerged from the chicken coop, feed bucket in one gnarled hand, and shook his head when he saw what I was carrying. Inside the kitchen, my mother was kneading bread the same way her mother had taught her, the same way her grandmother had done. The rhythm was hypnotic, comforting, and completely at odds with the sleek technology I'd just introduced to our century-old farmhouse. I set the box on the table, and she paused in her work long enough to wipe flour-dusted hands on her apron. "Another gadget," she murmured. Not unkindly, but with the resignation of someone who'd watched me fail at innovation before. I wanted to explain how this could help us survey crops, monitor irrigation, even assist with livestock management. I wanted to tell them about precision agriculture and efficiency improvements. Instead, I opened the box in silence, knowing that my actions would have to speak louder than any words I could offer. The drone sat nestled in foam, looking impossibly futuristic against our rustic backdrop. The manual was thicker than I'd expected, filled with warnings and regulations I'd never considered. While my family continued their morning routines, Dad checking fences on foot as he'd done for 30 years, Grandpa feeding chickens with grain scattered by hand, I studied flight patterns and safety protocols on our back porch. The learning curve was steeper than advertised. My first attempt at takeoff sent the drone careening into my mother's prized tomato plants, earning me a lecture about respecting things that actually fed the family. My second try was more successful, though the device hovered uncertainly above our barn, like a confused mechanical bird. From the ground, my family watched with varying degrees of skepticism. Dad leaned against the fence post, arms crossed, waiting for the inevitable crash. Grandpa muttered something about flying contraptions that I pretended not to hear. Even our border collie, Rex, seemed unimpressed, choosing to chase a real bird instead of my technological marvel. But as the drone gained altitude, something magical happened. Through the camera feed on my phone, I could see our farm from a perspective none of us had ever experienced. The patterns of our fields, the layout of irrigation channels, the way morning shadows fell across the pastures. It was beautiful and revealing in ways I hadn't anticipated. "Look at this," I called out, rushing toward my father with the phone extended. But he'd already turned away, heading back to check the water troughs the traditional way. That evening, as I recharged the battery and reviewed the footage, I felt the familiar sting of being dismissed. They called it playing with toys while real work needed doing. 3 weeks into drone ownership, I was beginning to understand our farm in ways that surprised me. The aerial perspective revealed drainage issues in the east pasture that we'd attributed to poor soil. From above, I could see exactly where water pooled and how it could be redirected. The technology was showing me problems that decades of ground-level observation had missed. I printed screenshots and spread them across the kitchen table during breakfast, pointing out areas where erosion was beginning, places where irrigation might be more. My family ate in polite silence, glancing occasionally at my findings but never engaging with the implications. "The northeast corner needs attention," I said, tapping a photo that clearly showed the beginning of a gully formation. Dad buttered his toast methodically. "Been farming that field for 20 years. Nothing wrong with it. But I'd seen the water flow patterns, the slight discoloration that indicated soil loss. The drone had captured evidence that ground-level inspection couldn't provide. I was learning to read the land like a book written in aerial photography, each flight revealing new chapters of agricultural intelligence. My grandfather shuffled through the photos, his arthritic fingers careful not to smudge the images. For a moment, I thought I saw interest flicker in his eyes. Then he set them down and reached for his coffee. "Technology's no substitute for knowing your land," he said quietly. That afternoon, I flew a grid pattern over our entire property, methodically documenting every acre. The drone's camera captured details that decades of farming experience had overlooked, but I was beginning to realize that data without acceptance was just noise. It happened during the 3rd week of June, when the summer heat was beginning to stress our corn crop. I'd been monitoring the fields daily, watching for signs of irrigation problems or pest damage. The drone's thermal imaging capabilities, a feature I'd discovered buried in the manual, revealed something that would have taken weeks to notice from ground level. A section of our main cornfield was showing heat stress patterns that weren't visible to the naked eye. The plants looked healthy from below, but the aerial thermal readings told a different story. The irrigation system had a blockage that was creating a dead zone, slowly starving plants of water in a pattern too subtle for traditional observation. I printed the thermal images and rushed to find my father. He was in the barn, repairing a harness that had seen better decades. When I showed him the photos, explaining what the colors meant, how the stressed plants were registering differently, he set down his tools and really looked. "Where exactly is this?" he asked, and I heard something new in his voice. Not enthusiasm, but genuine curiosity. We walked to the field together, the first time he'd accompanied me on anything drone-related. I showed him the area, and together we traced the irrigation line until we found the blockage. A clump of debris that had been choking water flow for days. 20 minutes to fix, he said, clearing the obstruction. Would have cost us half the yield if we'd caught it too late. That evening, for the first time, he asked to see the thermal footage from other fields. It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it wasn't dismissal either. Progress came in small increments on our farm. Despite the irrigation success, daily life returned to familiar patterns. My family acknowledged the usefulness of the drone, but treated it like an occasional tool rather than the revolutionary technology I believed it to be. They continued their traditional methods while I flew survey missions, creating parallel systems of farm management that rarely intersected. My mother still walked the entire perimeter of our vegetable garden each morning, checking for pests and problems that my overhead cameras could spot in minutes. My grandfather continued his evening walks through the pastures, counting cattle by hand while my drone could inventory the entire herd in a single flight. The divide wasn't hostile, just persistent. They had their ways, honed by generations of experience. I had my technology, promising efficiency and precision. We coexisted, rather than collaborated, each convinced that our methods were superior. During family dinners, conversation flowed around topics of weather, market prices, and neighbor news, while my aerial discoveries went unmentioned. I'd learned to keep my findings to myself unless they revealed immediate problems requiring attention. The isolation of innovation was something I hadn't anticipated. Being right wasn't enough if no one wanted to listen. Having better data didn't matter if traditional wisdom held more weight than technological insight. Some evenings I'd sit on the porch with my laptop, reviewing the day's flights while my family shared stories and observations from their ground-level work. The distance between us felt measured in more than just altitude. They were rooted in traditions that had sustained our farm for generations, while I was reaching toward possibilities they couldn't see the need for. Late July brought weather that tested everyone's methods. The approaching storm system was massive, and we had hay that needed harvesting before the rain arrived. Traditional timing said we had perhaps 6 hours of work ahead of us, cutting and baling before the weather turned. I launched the drone at first light, scanning for the driest sections of field and mapping the most efficient cutting pattern. The aerial view revealed moisture variations invisible from ground level, areas where morning dew had lifted faster, sections where the hay was perfectly ready for harvest. "Start with the south field," I told my father, showing him the footage. "The moisture content is ideal there, and we can work our way north as the other sections dry." He nodded, perhaps influenced by the previous month's irrigation success, and fired up the tractor. I continued flying reconnaissance missions, directing the harvest like an agricultural air traffic controller. The drone's perspective allowed me to optimize every pass, avoiding wet spots that would have gummed up the equipment. My grandfather watched from the fence line as we worked with unusual coordination. The traditional methods and modern technology were finally operating in harmony, each complementing the other's strengths. When the first raindrops began falling, we'd finished cutting everything salvageable. That evening, as rain drummed against the farmhouse windows, my father made his first positive comment about the drone. "Saved us a day's work," he admitted over dinner. "Maybe two." My mother smiled, the first time she'd shown approval for my technological pursuits. Grandpa remained silent, but I caught him studying the weather radar on my phone, following the storm's progression with interest. Small victories were still victories. August brought new challenges and opportunities to prove the drone's worth. Our neighbor, Tom Richardson, had been struggling with his cattle operation. His pastures were large and his herd had a tendency to wander into hard-to-reach areas, making daily counts time-consuming and occasionally dangerous. I offered to help with aerial surveys, thinking it might demonstrate the technology's value to my own family through a third party's success. Tom was skeptical, but desperate enough to try anything that might save him hours of horseback riding through rough terrain. The first cattle count from the air took 15 minutes and located every animal on his property, including 3 that had wandered through a broken fence line into the neighboring woods. Tom was amazed, my family was impressed, and I felt vindicated in ways that our own farm's successes hadn't quite achieved. Word spread through our rural community faster than I'd expected. Within weeks, I was flying missions for 5 different farms, helping with everything from crop monitoring to equipment location. The drone became a regional resource, and suddenly my investment seemed less like foolish spending and more like rural entrepreneurship. My father began mentioning these outside jobs during conversations with other farmers. He wasn't exactly bragging, but there was pride in his voice when he described how neighboring operations were benefiting from our technology. My mother started asking about the other families we were helping, integrating my work into her social network of rural relationships. Even my grandfather showed interest when Tom Richardson stopped by to thank us personally for finding his missing cattle before they'd caused property damage. Traditional farming values included helping neighbors, and technology that served that purpose earned grudging respect. September brought discussions about expanding the farm's technological capabilities. The drone's success had generated modest income from neighboring farms, and my father began researching other precision agriculture tools that might complement our aerial surveys. "Been looking at GPS guidance systems for the tractor," he mentioned one morning over coffee, spreading manufacturer brochures across the kitchen table. "Might reduce fuel costs and improve field efficiency." It was the first time he'd initiated a conversation about farm technology, and I felt a shift in our relationship that went beyond acceptance toward genuine collaboration. My mother joined the discussion, asking practical questions about costs and implementation timelines. My grandfather remained skeptical of GPS navigation, joking that he'd been finding his way around the farm for 70 years without satellites. But even he admitted that fuel savings were worth considering, especially with diesel prices climbing steadily. We spent the evening calculating potential returns on investment, comparing traditional methods with technology-assisted farming. The numbers were compelling, but more important was the sense that we were finally working together toward common goals, instead of operating parallel systems. The drone had become our proof of concept, demonstrating that modern tools could enhance rather than replace traditional farming wisdom. We were learning to blend innovation with experience, creating hybrid approaches that honored our history while embracing our future. By month's end, we'd ordered GPS guidance systems, and were researching soil testing technologies that could complement the drone's aerial monitoring capabilities. The farm was entering a new era, and I was no longer the only one driving technological adoption. October brought unexpected validation from sources I'd never anticipated. The County Agricultural Extension Office contacted us about participating in a demonstration program showcasing precision farming techniques to other local producers. Our farm had been recommended by multiple neighbors who'd benefited from our drone services. The extension agent, Sarah Martinez, arrived on a crisp autumn morning to evaluate our operation. She was impressed by the systematic approach we'd developed, combining traditional observation with aerial data collection. Our hybrid methodology had evolved organically into something worth sharing with the broader farming community. "You've created an excellent model for technology integration," she told my father as we reviewed months of aerial footage and harvest data. "The key is using tools to enhance existing knowledge, rather than replace it." My family beamed with pride as Sarah documented our processes and interviewed each of us about our experiences. Even my grandfather contributed insights about how aerial perspective had revealed historical patterns in our fields that he'd observed but never fully understood. The recognition transformed how my family viewed not just the drone, but my role in our farming operation. I was no longer the family member playing with expensive toys while others did real work. I'd become the bridge between tradition and innovation, translating technological capabilities into practical farm improvements. Local newspaper coverage followed the extension office visit, featuring our farm as an example of successful agricultural modernization. My mother clipped the article and added it to her collection of family achievements, right alongside 4-H ribbons and Harvest Festival awards. The attention brought new clients seeking drone services, and I found myself managing a small but growing agricultural technology business alongside my farm responsibilities. November marked my transition from student to teacher, as we hosted the first precision agriculture workshop on our farm. 12 local producers attended, eager to learn about integrating technology with traditional farming methods. My father and I co-presented, demonstrating how aerial monitoring complemented ground-level observation. I felt nervous addressing experienced farmers who'd been working the land longer than I'd been alive, but the presentation went smoothly. The combination of my technological expertise and my father's practical wisdom resonated with the audience. Questions came steadily, ranging from equipment costs to implementation strategies. My grandfather surprised everyone by sharing stories about farming innovations from his youth, drawing parallels between early mechanization and current technological adoption. His perspective added historical context that made our modern tools seem like natural evolution rather than revolutionary change. Every generation finds better ways to work the land, he told the group. Used to be oxen to tractors. Now it's tractors to computers. The goal stays the same, taking care of the farm and the family. My mother provided refreshments and fielded questions from other farm wives about the practical aspects of technology integration. Her support had been crucial in making the transition successful, and she took pride in sharing our family's experience with others. By workshop's end, several attendees had placed orders for drone services, and 2 were seriously considering purchasing their own equipment. We'd become regional leaders in agricultural innovation, a role none of us had anticipated when I first opened that package on our front porch. The day concluded with my father asking me to research advanced training programs that might help us expand our technological capabilities further. December brought reflection on a year that had transformed our farm and our family relationships. The drone that had once symbolized my isolation from traditional farming wisdom had become the catalyst for bridging generational approaches to agriculture. We'd learned to blend innovation with experience, creating something stronger than either approach alone. My daily routine now included both technological monitoring and traditional observation. I'd fly morning surveys while my father checked equipment and my grandfather walked the pastures. We'd meet for breakfast to compare notes, combining aerial data with ground-level insights to plan our day's work. The financial benefits were measurable: improved crop yields, reduced input costs, and income from drone services to neighboring farms. But the personal benefits were more significant. I'd found my place in our family's farming operation, contributing specialized skills while respecting traditional knowledge. My mother had become our unofficial public relations manager, coordinating workshop schedules and maintaining relationships with client farms. My father had embraced precision agriculture tools that complemented the drone's capabilities. Even my grandfather had learned to interpret basic aerial imagery, adding technological perspective to his decades of farming wisdom. Winter planning sessions now included discussions of technological upgrades alongside traditional concerns about seed varieties and equipment maintenance. We'd integrated innovation into our farm's culture without abandoning the values that had sustained us for generations. The skepticism I'd faced when introducing the drone had been replaced by collaborative enthusiasm for continuous improvement. We'd become a technology-forward operation that honored its traditional roots, proof that progress didn't require abandoning the past. As winter settled over our farm, I spent evenings reviewing the year's aerial footage and planning improvements for the coming season. The drone had captured not just agricultural data, but a visual record of our family's technological evolution. Each flight told the story of growing acceptance and collaborative innovation. Spring preparations were already incorporating lessons learned from our first full year of precision agriculture. We'd identified field areas needing soil amendments, irrigation improvements, and drainage modifications. The aerial perspective had revealed patterns invisible from ground level, guiding investments that would improve productivity for years to come. My relationship with farming had deepened through technology rather than being diminished by it. The drone had taught me to see our land with fresh eyes while respecting the wisdom my family had accumulated through generations of careful observation. Innovation and tradition weren't opposing forces. They were complementary tools for agricultural success. The business side of our operation continued growing as word spread about our drone services. We were considering hiring additional help for the upcoming season, expanding from family farm to regional agricultural service provider. The technology I'd purchased as a farming aid had become a catalyst for rural entrepreneurship. My family no longer called me useless, joking or otherwise. I'd proven that modern tools could enhance rather than replace traditional farming methods. More importantly, I'd learned that gaining respect required demonstrating value through consistent performance, rather than defending innovations through arguments. As I powered down the laptop and prepared for bed, I could hear my father and grandfather discussing tomorrow's plans in the kitchen. Their conversation included references to aerial surveys alongside traditional farm management tasks. We'd achieved true integration of old ways and new possibilities. The drone sat charging on my desk, ready for another day of bridging the gap between past and future, tradition and innovation, skepticism and acceptance. Thank you so much for listening to this story about finding your place between tradition and innovation. I hope it resonated with anyone who's ever felt caught between generations or struggled to prove their worth to family. Please write in the comments below what part of the world you're listening from. I'd love to know where this story has traveled. And if you enjoyed this tale of family, farming, and finding your place, please subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the beautiful complexity of modern life. Until next time, keep bridging the gap between where you've been and where you're going.